Deep within the pages of the Hebrew Bible lies a mysterious figure, one whose presence echoes through ancient stones and weathered texts, yet whose story remains largely untold in modern religious discourse. Her name is Asherah, and according to ancient inscriptions, she may have been none other than the wife of Yahweh, the God of Israel. In the sun-baked lands of the ancient Near East, before the rise of monotheism, Asherah stood as one of the most powerful deities in the pantheon. A mother goddess, a divine queen, worshipped by kings and commoners alike. Her sacred symbols, the tree of life, the lion, the sacred pole, can still be found etched in pottery and carved in stone across archaeological sites from Israel to Syria. But how did this powerful goddess, once revered in temples and households throughout the region, become largely erased from religious memory? Why do so many biblical scholars now believe that the God of Israel may have had a divine partner? And what does this mean for our understanding of ancient Israelite religion? My name is Brian, and I've spent years studying the fascinating intersection of archaeology, biblical texts, and ancient Near Eastern religion. What I'm about to share with you isn't just another historical documentary. It's a journey into the heart of a profound theological mystery that challenges our traditional understanding of biblical history. In this video, we'll examine archaeological evidence that has stunned biblical scholars, decode ancient texts that speak of divine marriage, and piece together the story of how ancient Israelite religion evolved from its polytheistic roots to the monotheism we know today. But I want to be clear, this is a complex story, one that requires us to set aside our preconceptions and look at the evidence with fresh eyes. We'll need to navigate through layers of history, theology, and archaeology. Some of what we discover may challenge long-held beliefs, while other findings might deepen our appreciation for the rich tapestry of ancient religious thought. Join me as we uncover the story of Asherah, the divine wife, and explore how her tale transforms our understanding of biblical history and the development of Western religion. The story of Asherah isn't hidden in obscure historical documents. It's written in plain sight within the pages of the Hebrew Bible. Though often overlooked, her presence appears over 40 times, revealed through direct mentions and symbolic references that paint a fascinating picture of ancient Israelite religious practices. In the Hebrew text, we find two primary ways Asherah is mentioned: as Asherah with a lowercase a, referring to wooden cultic objects, and as Asherah with a capital A, indicating the goddess herself. This linguistic distinction is crucial for understanding how her worship evolved over time. Let's examine our first key biblical passage, Judges 6:25-26. Here we find the famous story of Gideon. That night the Lord said to Gideon, "Take your father's bull and a second bull 7 years old and pull down the altar of Baal that belongs to your father, and cut down the Asherah pole that is beside it, and build an altar to the Lord your God." This passage is remarkable for several reasons. First, it shows that Asherah worship was practiced alongside the worship of Yahweh, even in the household of an Israelite family. The presence of both an altar to Baal and an Asherah pole suggests these weren't hidden practices, but open and accepted forms of worship. Moving forward in biblical history, we encounter another significant reference in 1 Kings 18:19. Here, the prophet Elijah confronts King Ahab. "Now therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and also the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." This passage is particularly revealing. It shows that Asherah worship wasn't just a folk practice, it was officially supported by the royal court. The fact that 400 prophets of Asherah were maintained at the queen's expense tells us this was an organized, well-established religious institution. Perhaps the most detailed account comes from 2 Kings 23:4-7, describing King Josiah's religious reforms. The king commanded the high priest Hilkiah to bring out of the temple of the Lord all the vessels made for Baal, for Asherah, and for all the host of heaven. He broke down the houses of the male temple, prostitutes that were in the house of the Lord, where the women did weaving for Asherah. This passage provides remarkable detail about Asherah worship in ancient Israel. We learn that Asherah had a place within the Jerusalem temple itself. There were specific vessels dedicated to her worship. Women were involved in creating ritual objects for her. Her worship was integrated into the official temple cult. These three passages, spanning different periods of Israelite history, reveal a crucial narrative: Asherah. Worship wasn't a foreign intrusion into Israelite religion. It was an integral part of it. The very fact that religious reformers had to actively work to remove her worship suggests how deeply embedded she was in ancient Israelite religious life. But these biblical references raise as many questions as they answer. Why was Asherah worship so persistent? What was her relationship to Yahweh? And why was there such a concerted effort to eliminate her from Israelite religion? To answer these questions, we need to look beyond the text to what archaeology has revealed about Asherah worship in ancient Israel. In the stark beauty of the Negev desert, at a remote crossroads once known as Kuntillet Ajrud, archaeologists made a discovery that would revolutionize our understanding of ancient Israelite religion. This lonely outpost, dating to the 8th century BCE, held a secret that had waited nearly 3,000 years to be revealed. On the walls of this ancient way station, inscribed in ink on pottery, were words that would shake the foundations of religious history. I bless you by Yahweh of Samaria and by his Asherah. And another, I bless you by Yahweh of Teman and his Asherah. These inscriptions are revolutionary because they explicitly link Yahweh and Asherah as a divine pair. The possessive his suggests something profound, that in the minds of ancient Israelites, the God of Israel had a consort, a female counterpart. But Kuntillet Ajrud isn't alone. Similar evidence has emerged from the site of Khirbet el-Qam, where an 8th century BCE tomb inscription reads, Blessed be Uriyahu by Yahweh and by his Asherah. From his enemies he saved him. Perhaps even more telling than these inscriptions are the thousands of small female figurines found throughout ancient Israel and Judah. These clay figures, known as pillar figurines, have been found in nearly every archaeological excavation of Israelite homes from the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. They show a female figure with prominent breasts, often holding a disc or tablet. What's remarkable isn't just their existence, but their ubiquity. We found them everywhere, from humble village homes to wealthy urban dwellings, from Dan in the north to Beersheba in the south. This wasn't a fringe cult. This was mainstream Israelite religious practice. The archaeological evidence goes deeper. At numerous sites, we've discovered what appear to be ritual, stands and altar boxes. One of the most striking examples comes from Tanakh, this elaborate clay stand decorated with intricate reliefs shows alternating images of a sacred tree and a nude goddess figure, symbols consistently associated with Asherah. We've also found numerous tree and pole symbols, painted vessels showing what appears to be the sacred tree, and countless amulets and pendants bearing feminine divine imagery. But perhaps the most startling evidence comes from Jerusalem itself. In the very temple of Yahweh, archaeologists have found evidence supporting the biblical account of Asherah worship. Feminine divine symbols, remains of wooden poles, ritual vessels marked with distinctive symbols, weaving implements matching the biblical description of women weaving for Asherah. What makes these discoveries so significant is how they align with and illuminate the biblical text. They show us that Asherah worship wasn't just tolerated, it was an integral part of how ancient Israelites practiced their faith. The evidence spans centuries, suggesting this wasn't a brief deviation from monotheism, but rather a long-standing religious tradition that saw Yahweh and Asherah as a divine couple. As Dr. William Deaver puts it, the archaeological evidence suggests that in the minds of ancient Israelite worshippers, Asherah was not some foreign deity, but rather the natural complement to Yahweh, his divine consort. When we piece together the inscriptions, the figurines, the cult objects, and the temple remains, a clear picture emerges. The early Israelite religion was far more complex and nuanced than later traditions would suggest. But to truly understand the significance of these discoveries, we need to explore the broader religious context of the ancient Near East. To understand Asherah's true significance, we must journey back to a time when the religious landscape of the ancient Near East looked vastly different from what we know today. The land we now know as Israel and Palestine was once called Canaan, a region where gods and goddesses were as numerous as stars in the night sky. This wasn't a primitive belief system. It was a sophisticated religious worldview that had evolved over thousands of years. At the head of this divine family sat El, whose very name meant God, the aged, wise father of all deities. Depicted as an elderly but powerful king with a flowing white beard, El presided over what ancient texts call the Divine Council. Picture, if you will, a cosmic court. El seated on his mountain throne, surrounded by his divine family. Among these deities, none was more prominent than his consort, Asherah, the Queen of Heaven. The Ugaritic texts, discovered at modern-day Ras Shamra in Syria, paint a vivid picture of this divine hierarchy. El sits enthroned at the sources of the two rivers, at the meeting of the two deeps. In his court, the gods feast, Asherah at his side as queen. In this celestial family, Asherah wasn't just El's wife. She was called the Mother of the Gods, credited with giving birth to 70 divine children. Among these were some names familiar to readers of the Bible: Baal, Anat, Yam, the sea, and Mot, death. Her symbols were deeply meaningful: the sacred tree, representing life and nurture, the lion showing her power, and the sea from which she was said to emerge as she who walks upon the sea. But here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. As the Israelites emerged as a distinct people, they didn't immediately reject this religious worldview. Instead, they adapted it. Archaeological evidence suggests that early Israelites simply identified Yahweh with El, the head of the divine council. This wasn't a radical break from Canaanite religion. It was more like a reform movement. Within it, even the Hebrew Bible preserves echoes of this divine council. In Psalm 82, we read, "God stands in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment." The transition from polytheism to monotheism wasn't sudden. It was a gradual process that took place over centuries. Phase 1, full participation in Canaanite polytheism. Phase 2, elevation of Yahweh as chief deity, partnered with Asherah. Phase 3, exclusive worship of Yahweh with Asherah as consort. Phase 4, movement towards strict monotheism. This evolution is reflected in the archaeological record. We see the 10th century BCE, multiple deity worship common. 9th, 8th centuries, Yahweh, Asherah, partnership dominant. 7th century, reform movements begin. 6th century, push toward exclusive monotheism. What makes this history so crucial is that it helps us understand why Asherah was so deeply embedded in Israelite religious life. She wasn't a foreign intrusion. She was part of the very foundations of Israelite religious thought. The concept of the divine council didn't simply disappear. It was transformed. The other deities became angels, divine messengers serving the one God. But Asherah's role as divine consort was too intimate to be simply transformed. It had to be eliminated entirely. Yet this elimination didn't happen easily or quickly. The people's attachment to Asherah was deep and long-lasting. After all, how do you erase a mother goddess who had been worshipped for generations? The answer is slowly, gradually, and never completely. The sacred trees, the divine feminine, the queen of heaven. These symbols and concepts would continue to echo through the centuries, finding new expressions in later religious traditions. But to fully understand how these symbols evolved, we need to look more closely at how Asherah was represented in ancient Israelite culture. In the ancient world, symbols weren't just decorative elements. They were a sacred language speaking, truths too profound for words alone, and few deities were associated with richer symbolism than Asherah. At the heart of Asherah worship stood the sacred tree. But this wasn't just any tree, it was the tree of life, itself a powerful symbol of divine nurture and eternal renewal. When archaeologists uncover carved trees on ancient Israelite seals and pottery, they're not just finding decorative patterns, they're discovering evidence of a sophisticated symbolic system that once permeated Israelite culture. Look at this remarkable cult stand found at Tanakh. The tree appears between two lions with a goddess. Figure above. This wasn't random imagery, it was a complete theological statement. Divine power, the lions protecting sacred life, the tree, all embodied in the goddess herself. The famous Asherah poles mentioned in the Bible were likely stylized trees, wooden columns that stood beside altars throughout ancient Israel. They set up sacred pillars and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. 2 Kings 17:10. But why trees? The answer lies in Asherah's role as a mother goddess. Trees, with their cycles of flowering and fruiting, their ability to provide shelter and sustenance perfectly, symbolize the nurturing, life-giving aspects of the divine feminine. Each branch reaching toward heaven, each root delving into earth, spoke of connection between divine and human realms. The sacred groves where Asherah was worshipped weren't just places of ritual, they were living symbols of her presence, the canopy above, her protective embrace, the fertility of the soil, her life-giving power, the seasonal cycles, her eternal renewal, the shade and shelter, her maternal care. This tree symbolism wasn't unique to Asherah. Throughout the ancient Near East, we find similar goddess figures associated with sacred trees. Egyptian Isis with the sycamore tree, Mesopotamian Inanna with the date palm, Hathor as Lady of the Sycamore, Greek Artemis with her sacred groves. But Asherah's tree symbolism was distinctive in its integration with monotheistic worship. Her sacred trees stood right beside Yahweh's altars, suggesting a profound theological partnership. The maternal aspects of Asherah's symbolism can't be overstated. Clay figurines found throughout Israel show a goddess figure holding her breasts, a powerful symbol of divine nurture. These weren't crude fertility idols as they were later portrayed. They were sophisticated theological statements about divine care and sustenance. In ancient Israelite homes, these symbols created a complete sacred landscape. The goddess figurine on the household altar, the sacred tree or pole in the courtyard, the grove on the nearby hilltop. But as Israelite religion evolved, these symbols didn't simply vanish, they transformed. The tree of life appears in later Jewish mysticism. The divine feminine emerges in wisdom literature. Sacred groves influence sanctuary design. Some scholars even suggest that the menorah, with its tree-like form, preserves echoes of Asherah. Symbolism transformed into a new religious context. What's remarkable is how persistent these symbols proved to be. Bronze Age, natural trees and groves. Iron Age, stylized poles and carved images. Second Temple period, architectural and artistic echoes. Later traditions, mystical and esoteric symbolism. Understanding these symbols helps us grasp why Asherah worship was so deeply rooted in ancient Israelite life. These weren't abstract theological concepts. They were living symbols that spoke to fundamental human needs for nurture, protection, and divine care. The tree, the pole, the sacred grove. These weren't just religious symbols. They were a language of the sacred feminine that spoke deeply to ancient worshipers and whose echoes continue to resonate through religious tradition. But this rich, symbolic world would face unprecedented challenges as Israelite religion moved toward strict monotheism. The story of Asherah's removal from Israelite religion is not just a tale of theological change, it's a complex narrative of political power, social transformation, and religious reform that would reshape the foundations of Western religion. The process began in earnest during what scholars call the Deuteronomic Reform period, reaching its climax during the reign of King Josiah in the 7th century BCE. Picture the scene in Jerusalem around 622 BCE. King Josiah, having ascended to the throne at just 8 years old, has grown into a determined religious reformer. A dramatic discovery is made in the temple. Hilkiah the high priest said to Shaphan the secretary, "I have found the book of the law in the temple of the Lord," in Kings 22:8. What followed was nothing less than a religious revolution. The king ordered Hilkiah the high priest to remove from the temple of the Lord all the articles made for Baal and Asherah and all the starry hosts, 2 Kings 23:4. But why? Why this systematic campaign to remove a goddess who had been worshipped alongside Yahweh? For centuries, the answers are complex and interconnected. Political motivations. Assyrian Empire's decline created opportunity for reform. Need to unite people under single religious authority. Centralization of worship in Jerusalem. Strengthening of royal authority through religious control. Religious motivations. Movement towards strict monotheism. Influence of prophetic teachings. Desire for distinctive religious identity. Response to national disasters seen as divine punishment. Social factors. Urbanization changing religious practices. Shift from family-based to temple-centered worship. Growing power of priestly class. Changes in economic structures. The implementation was systematic and thorough. Destruction of local shrines and high places. Removal of Asherah poles and sacred trees. Elimination of goddess figurines. Centralization of sacrifice in Jerusalem. The archaeological record shows the effectiveness of these reforms. Dramatic decrease in goddess figurines. Destruction layers at local shrines. Changes in household religious items. New forms of religious architecture. But perhaps the most profound change was in the very structure of religious authority. The old system, local shrines with male and female priests. Family-based worship including feminine divine. Women's active role in religious practices. Balance of masculine and feminine divine powers. The new system, centralized male priesthood, temple-based authority structure, reduced role for women in official worship, exclusively masculine divine imagery. This restructuring had profound implications for women's religious roles. Loss of female religious leadership positions, reduction in women's ritual participation, elimination of goddess-centered practices, transformation of feminine divine imagery. Yet the reform wasn't universally accepted. Evidence shows continued resistance, hidden goddess figurines, persistent tree symbolism, underground worship practices, prophetic complaints about ongoing polytheism. Rather than complete elimination, many aspects of Asherah worship were transformed. Divine wisdom, Chokmah, takes on feminine attributes. Shekinah develops as feminine divine presence. Tree of life symbolism continues. Mother of God imagery emerges in later traditions. The erasure of Asherah wasn't just a religious reform, it was a fundamental restructuring of how people understood their relationship with the divine. The implications echoed through centuries. Shaped development of monotheism. Influenced gender roles in religion. Affected religious authority structures. Created tensions that persist today. Yet despite this systematic suppression, traces of the divine feminine remained, suggesting that some aspects of religious experience are too fundamental to be entirely erased. But how did this transformation affect the deeper understanding of divinity itself? The story of divine femininity in religious tradition didn't end with the suppression of Asherah. Instead, it evolved, transformed, and found new expressions that continue to influence theological thinking today. As Dr. Margaret Barker notes, the evidence for the goddess has required us to completely rethink our understanding of ancient Israelite religion. Our comprehension of early Israelite religion has undergone dramatic changes. 1800s, simple progression from paganism to monotheism. 1920s, discovery of Ugaritic texts. 1960s and archaeological revelations. 1980s, Kuntillet Ajrud findings present complex picture of religious development. Modern scholars debate three main interpretations. Traditional view, monotheism was original Israelite religion. Goddess worship was foreign influence. Reforms restored pure religion. Evolutionary view, Religion developed gradually. Monotheism emerged over centuries. Goddess worship was indigenous. Synthesis few. Multiple forms of Yahwism existed. Official and popular religion differed. Complex interaction of traditions. These scholarly debates have profound implications for modern religious understanding. The discovery of Asherah hasn't just changed our view of the past, explains Dr. William Deaver. It's changed how we think about the divine in the present. Modern theological reflections have emerged in several areas. 1. Feminine divine language, inclusive religious language. Recovery of feminine divine imagery. New liturgical expressions. Contemporary prayer practices. 2. Religious symbolism. Revival of tree imagery. Return of feminine divine symbols. New artistic expressions. Contemporary sacred spaces. 3. Theological understanding. Broader concepts of divinity. Recognition of religious complexity. Appreciation of historical diversity. New approaches to sacred texts. Perhaps most significantly, these discoveries have led to deeper questions about the nature of religious development itself. How do religions change over time? What role does gender play in divine imagery? How do we balance tradition and new understanding? What can ancient practices teach modern believers? The impact extends beyond any single tradition. The Asherah discoveries, notes Dr. Susan Ackerman, have contributed to interfaith dialogue by showing how religious traditions share common roots and similar patterns of development. Looking back at the ancient evidence, we see not just artifacts, but mirrors of our own wrestling with divine understanding, ancient believers seeking divine presence, communities balancing change and tradition, people finding sacred meaning in daily life, the eternal search for divine connection. This journey from ancient goddess to modern theological reflection reminds us that religious understanding is never static. It evolves, adapts, and finds new expression in each generation. The story of Asherah isn't just about the past, it's about how we understand the divine today and how that understanding might continue to evolve in the future. As we end our journey, remember, this isn't just a story about the past. It's about how we understand the divine today and how that understanding might continue to grow tomorrow.